All right, in this chapter, we are going to talk about international sports sponsorship. Sponsorship is one of the promotional elements within, the promotional mix elements within that fourth P of the marketing mix, that is promotion. We spend a lot of time in our whole chapter on sports sponsorship because of the size and growth of sports sponsorship. We'll talk a little bit about why that is throughout these next few videos, but especially so in international sport. And so let's dive into it. This first thing I want to talk about is what we've called the elusive fan. I've mentioned this a couple times throughout the semester. There's a book by Ryan Kotler and Shields, was published in 2006, and actually I think they have a newer version now of it. But essentially the whole idea of the book is that consumers in today's society are becoming more increasingly elusive. What we mean by that is we can't capture them. And more importantly so, with the advent of technology, we mentioned the second screen, the third screen, consumers are going so many different directions when they're watching sporting events or attending sporting events or even participating in an event that our job as marketers is becoming more difficult because we're trying to capture the attention of the ever elusive fan, the fan that's looking around trying to do something different everywhere they go. We're competing not only with other sporting events on television, but we're also competing for other entertainment options. So if I live in Arlington, I could go to get Texas Rangers tickets, or I could go to Six Flags, or I can go to the water park. I'm not sure what it's called now, Wet n Wild, Hurricane Harbor, or whatever it is now. I could go to the movie theater. I could go to the mall. I could sit at home and watch the game in my own couch and air condition and so on and so forth. There's so many different things that the fan could do. Our job is to try to attract them to our desirable product. And so in a lot of ways, that's not just true for us as marketers of sporting organizations or sporting events. It's also true for advertisers. The old way of advertising, according to a lot of scholars, has to be abandoned. You have to desert the old way of advertising because the old way of advertising was really, let's throw our information in front of people and it'll work. Well, if you look at the picture I've got here, just Times Square, it's known for its advertising. And while people go there to ooh and ah over all of the advertisements and the buzz of the city, that's not going to be as effective. Think of just in sports, think of a minor league baseball or even a little league baseball team, maybe your high school team, going to a game and looking at the outfield wall. Odds are there's probably 20, 30 ads sitting on an outfield wall. How many of those do you actually remember? And you may have gone to multiple games at that venue. The point is, how effective is outfield signage in sports really being? How effective is marketing messages on television when there is DVR or recording of television shows so that you can just skip through the commercials? How effective is that anymore? And the answer is questionably or arguably no, it isn't effective. And so what we have to do as marketers for our own products, marketing of sport, is to attract fans to an ever elusive environment, ever elusive consumer. But advertisers are doing the same thing. How do we get in front of consumers? So think of this idea of the DVR proof, or the DVR idea, recording television shows. Very seldom do you find somebody who purely records sporting events and then watches them again. In other words, sporting events have arguably been called DVR proof. In other words, if you didn't watch it live, was it worth watching at all? If you're a hardcore fan of the team and you want to rewatch the game, or you have to work and you really want to watch the game live, you record it and turn off all your cell phones and not get on social media to hear about the outcome of the game. But for the most part, everybody watches a game live because without it, it's yesterday's news. And so a lot of advertisers are starting to turn towards sports because the old way of advertising is being deserted. So what we're going to talk about over the next couple videos is all about sponsorship. We'll start first with this discussion about the basics of sports sponsorship. How does it work? Then we'll talk in the next video and the future videos about growth and trends, objectives, activation, and then some considerations specifically to global sports sponsorship. And then at the end of this, we'll have an activity. So let's get into the basics of sports marketing. All right, so sports marketing is essentially an exchange relationship. It comes from a theory called exchange theory, where two or more parties exchange resources. The resources offered by each party must be equally valued by both parties. So in this circumstance, we're talking about a sports sponsorship in which a sport property has something of value and a sponsor has something of value. And a sponsor can also be termed a corporation. In other literature, and if you work in the field of sports sponsorship, you may also hear the terms called property rights holder. The rights holder is this person essentially. We've also got rights seller. It's also commonly termed together as being the sport property. And then you also have the rights buyer. The rights buyer is the person who's buying the rights to put their name on a property. And so in this circumstance, we'll keep it simple, call it a sports property or a sponsor. And so in both parties, in the exchange, there's two parties here, in which both parties have something of equal value. And they exchange that for the purposes of advancing their company and their purpose. So let's take the sport property. What does the sport property have? Well, first of all, what is the sport property? Sport property is defined as a sporting event, a team. It could also be included as an athlete themselves. But let's just keep it simple and say a sport property is a team or an event. At an event or a team has a facility in which they have the opportunity to put up advertisers' logos as well as give them other opportunities. And so let's say you go to a soccer game or watching it on television. On the sideline, you'll see ads that will rotate. Essentially, we call these rotating ads or trifolds or ribbon boards, depending on how they're set up. But what the sport property has of value is that property, that space on the field that a sponsor wants. They want to be in front of the consumer during the sporting event because we know it's DVR proof, people want to see it live, and so they'll be in front of that audience, hopefully the same target market as a sponsor. We'll get to that later. And so what does the property want in exchange? So if the sponsor wants to be on the field, what do they have to give up? Well, there's lots of things. But essentially, the sport property wants a financial investment. That financial investment is the form of 3 different forms of payment, either cash, in kind, or trade. But essentially, the sport property gets some sort of financial investment to make their revenue stream increase. They also want media and promotional commitments. This is a little bit hard to explain other than the fact that if a sport property has a broadcasting deal, for example, they were required to sell a certain number of ads during the game, whether it's 20 or 30%, and their job is to sell those to sponsors. So they have commitments, promotional commitments that they have to meet, and so sponsors can help them meet that. So the sport property gets money from the sponsor and fulfills media and promotional commitments. Well, in exchange, what does the sponsor want? Well, depends on the objectives, and we'll talk about that later in these videos, of what the sponsor wants. It could be awareness. It could be enhancing the image. It could be an opportunity just to demonstrate their product. So many times you'll see at sporting events, they'll have booths set up. A company is handing out samples, which will be our product trials, or they want you to come and try out their product there in the facility. It's all about trying to get people to buy the product. It could be for hospitality purposes, could be sales opportunities, but it all comes back to the bottom line. Their investment on the field, on the video board, during commercials is just that, an investment. It is not a donation to the team. It is not for philanthropic reasons. Their purpose is to invest their marketing dollar with the sport organization in the hopes that there is a return. So the definition of sports sponsorship is that it is an investment in cash or in kind, also known sometimes as trade, in an activity in return for some exploitable commercial potential associated with that activity. So 2 examples I have on the screen, the Staples Center. Staples is obviously a company that paid for the rights to be the official name of the facility. And then there's example of Manchester United and the Nike logo in the seats. Okay, so those are all examples. Whoops, where did I go? Sorry about that. Hold on one second. I lost it. There we go. Sorry about that. Let me go back up one. There we go. So oftentimes sports sponsorship is confused with a couple of other terms. I mentioned one of them a second ago, philanthropic or philanthropy. You may have heard of philanthropy before. Philanthropy is defined as really gifts to any institution, and that the key to this is that the gift is motivated by the satisfaction of knowing that something good is being done. And so oftentimes you'll see philanthropy as associated with sporting events, especially in college athletics, where somebody is donating X number of dollars, and oh, by the way, that also gives them seats to season tickets to the football game. Okay. In this circumstance, the sport property really has very few strings they have to give up. I recognize that that consumer gave us money. It's essentially a donation, and it's for altruism reasons and not for commercialism. Philanthropy is a gift without an expectation in return. That is different and set apart from licensing, which we briefly mentioned before. But essentially, a license is an arrangement where a firm, so a corporation, produces a product that uses an athletic platform to tie in. And so the licensee receives all kinds of rights, logos, signs, symbols, and can put those on clothing or on other types of things, and they pay a royalty fee back to the organization. Essentially, the purpose or the focus is to brand the property via its marks to the product in order to sell that product. So the whole point of a license is that you're using the logo of the team or the organization in that likeness to make money off of them. You give them their royalty fees back. That is different from philanthropy, in that philanthropy is a gift without expectation of return. Licensing is asking for the rights to use the logo or the likeness to produce a product to make a profit. And that, again, is separate and apart from sponsorship, which we just mentioned, which is a financial media or in-kind fee paid to a property in return for access to exploitable commercial potential that's associated with that property. In other words, the sponsor is given a set of benefits. They can put their sign on an outfield wall. They have a 30-second commercial spot during the event. Along the concourse, they can hand out samples of their product for marketing purposes. And really what the sport property receives is, depending on the organization, it could be financial investment or that media and promotional commitments. And then finally, the focus of it is that it is using the property as a promotional platform to achieve some sort of business objective, which we'll get to objectives in a little bit. These three are separate and apart. And the reason I define and give specific examples of each is because many times they're confused with one another. Philanthropy is a gift without an expectation of return. A license is a third party using a logo of a team or a sport property to make money off of them. And a sponsorship is trying to get in front of sports fans in some sort of platform. That is an outfield wall commercial spot. But all of them are done for different reasons. And so it's important to know the reason why a company or a person would engage in one of these three activities as to understanding their motives and what they want to have in the future. We'll talk about return on investment in just a little while. And so what are sponsors looking for? That third category, the one we focus on the most. Marketers are under pressure to show immediate return on their investment for all of their advertising campaigns, and that includes a sponsorship. Again, a sponsorship is not a gift. So they want to have a return on their marketing dollar. They could spend $1,000 on an outfield sign for the minor league baseball team, or they can spend $1,000 on a local radio spot not associated with sport. You as a sports marketer have to convince them why that outfield sign or that $1,000 worth of sponsoring the team is going to be more valuable than that radio spot or that other advertising dollar that they could be spending it on. And so, for example, if you're McDonald's, in this picture right here at Yankee Stadium, if you're McDonald's and you implement a sponsorship package with the Yankees, what do you want to see in these stores? Probably the answer is an increased traffic to the stores. And so oftentimes you see this goal of convenience products such as McDonald's or Taco Bell or other types of fast food companies trying to drive traffic to their store. Again, they could spend that dollar on a commercial spot. They could spend it on a billboard. What's going to be most valuable to them? In this circumstance, if I hand out coupons as people walk out of Yankee Stadium, you see the entrance right there down the street, that might drive more traffic to my store than if I would have spent it on a TV or commercial spot. And we're going to get to this in just a second, but the whole point of a sponsorship is that they have to find a good mix between a combination of goodwill in the minds of consumers amongst their highly involved fans. We know that if highly involved fans have a high level of contingent goodwill perception, they're more likely to lead to an actual consumer's purchase.